Friday, 23rd September at 8:30 p.m. on Wacana English Edition. We take a deep dive into data and security. Are we safe? Amid increasing concerns around cybersecurity, frequent scams, and fraud cases that plague the rakyat. Now, did you know that according to PDRM's Commercial Crimes Investigation Department, over 5.2 billion ringgit was reported lost due to scams over a period of just 2 years from 2020 till May this year? So, we'll be discussing safeguarding personal information as well as the importance of organizational data security. While looking at the root cause behind widespread scams, we'll stay focused on actionable and lasting solutions. Join our panel of experts and meet Tamina Kausji this Friday at 8:30 p.m. as we discuss keeping safe from online fraud and scams. Live on sinardaily.my and all Sinar Daily social media platforms, including YouTube.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Wacana English Edition with me, Tamina Kausji. And of course, this is the show that gives our international as well as English speaking viewers insights on the political, social, as well as economic landscape of Malaysia. Now, of course, tonight we're discussing data security and safety. Internet fraud keeps making the headlines relentlessly, and quite often, scammers and their increasingly sophisticated cybercrimes rob Malaysians not just of their hard earned savings, but in recent times also of their lives. Now, this week, reports around 23-year-old Goi Zen Feng's death in Thailand after falling prey to a human trafficking scheme spotlight just one family's incalculable loss. So, in fact, earlier this month, did you know the Ministry of Foreign Affairs acknowledged receiving almost 200 reports of Malaysians who are victims of job scam syndicates regionally? In addition, let's never forget the almost daily reports of Malaysians of all ages and backgrounds losing money to all types of online scammers. We aim to ask the questions about what actually are the gaps when it comes to banking institutions as well as enforcement authorities' approach insofar. And at the same time, what's in place already to safeguard Malaysians' data and security? With all that in mind, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome our live panel in the studios with us here at Sinar Daily, beginning with Lembah Pantai Member of Parliament, Yang Berhormat Fahmi Fadzil, Shaso Group CEO Munira Mustafa, and last but certainly not least, Cybersecurity Malaysia Strategic Research Division Senior Vice President, Colonel T.S. Sazali Sukardi. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for making time. And I would like to start off by painting the big picture. Perhaps Sazali could help us with that. Tell us a little bit about the different types of general internet fraud that we have and their definitions and differences. All the way from we've got spams, scams, spyware, but what are they actually, shortly?
Okay, thank you, Tamina, for the question. I will respond from cybersecurity perspective.
Sure.
I'm not a lawyer, so basically internet fraud is the fraudulent activities committed over internet. And there are various fraud that exist over internet. Misuse of communication applications and online activities. And some of the misuse of the facilities that include misuse of computers for fraud. And fraud is, in general, is the misrepresentation or misuse of trust through deceptions. And the motive of fraud may be technical, maybe financial or non-financial. And spam basically is the unintended messages sent to people in which we have no idea who are the senders. And most of the time, spam can have two possibilities. It can have some malicious intent and it can be a normal spam. But to be safe, in most cases, criminals, they always spam email in order to steal our identity. And most of the phishing attack aim to steal our identity is sent to spam email. CD is spam. And phishing is a technique to steal our identity because in most criminal activities, criminal try to get initial entry to our computer through phishing attack, through social engineering by exploiting our ignorance and negligence, not so much on technical. So once they are inside our computers, we will create a backdoor and using the backdoor to explore our computers. This is phishing. So, but the effect of phishing attack, even though it is very low level, non-technical, but it can give great impact to the organizations because the criminal can cause damage to the business and other activities in the organizations.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Jay Sazali. That's a great brief overview of everything that we will be addressing. And often many of these internet frauds, they actually intersect. And you could have 3 or 4 at the same time happening to one particular individual who's maybe targeted. Munira, I wanted to ask you about the fact that, of course, we've had so many high-profile cases of data leaks, counting millions amongst us in Malaysia who are affected. Why is our data so vulnerable overall as a big picture?
So that's a multi-layered question. And since we don't know for sure how these databases were compromised, it's really difficult to state with certainty how or why our data was exposed. Now, one of the biggest issues there is that there are strong denials have been made with statements made public following these breaches and denying all that these incidents have been happening. And it was never made clear that what kind of investigations were done or even if these occurrences were actually looked into. So in other words, there's not been much reasonable explanations being provided or about the response mechanisms or even of what is being done to prevent any of these future intrusions. So the other problem that we have is that we have a very poor operational security culture, top-down across the board. So this is a thing that's not being instilled or cultivated. And I think we should also rethink about our own personal identifier system, such as our identification card, our IC, and how it's being designated and being applied, because it contains not only our birth number, our year of birth, but also the place where we were born. And these are often the key security questions that people use for the passwords.
Okay, there you go. So I think that makes us all think back about what our individual security passwords are. From there, YB Fahmi, you've just called for a Royal Commission of Inquiry and RCI to look into Malaysia's cybersecurity following yet another data leak from a government agency. What do you hope this might actually address if it does happen?
I think like what Munira was saying, a lot of people ask this question, how did my data get stolen? There doesn't seem to be very much accountability, especially on the part of the organization that has been entrusted to hold our data. Fundamentally, I don't think we look at our personal data as a national asset, as something which is not only to be treasured, but also something to be monetized. And in this day and age with big data and the way social media operates, data is essentially money. And we don't have this sense that it needs to be protected. I hope if the government does do an RCI, at the very least, we want to understand how is it that we lost collectively over 100 million sets of personal data points, or more than that, actually. Over 100 million data sets were stolen from various organizations in the last 5 years. I was first very severely affected by this when in 2017 there was news about there was a company that was holding on to all of the data from all of the telcos in Malaysia. So 46.2 million sets of information of telco users, and that was the thing that got me thinking. That was before I became an MP.
Yes, so that's right, 2017.
How did you lose all of this data? It's everybody's data, And I think what was extremely baffling to me was there was no sense of accountability or urgency. Fundamentally, we have to relook at our Personal Data Protection Act 2010, which needs to be updated very urgently.
Sure. Thanks for that, YB. And Jay Sazali, so perfect segue into, so do Malaysians have adequate privacy rights, data protection and security under PDPA 2010? Or what do you feel from a cybersecurity perspective coming from CSM?
Okay, from one perspective, there is a lot of area that we can improve in terms of protecting our personal data. Of course, when it comes to law, we have our own security interests in which we have to secure our security interests. And PDPA is meant to protect personal data in terms of availability, in terms of confidentiality, That means we try to prevent against unauthorized disclosure, prevention against unauthorized modification, and against denial of service. And of course, at this moment, the PDPA is more important, users must know their right. If their data is compromised, they must go to the relevant authority and report. But what we are facing today, the issue is that the user themselves, they have no idea they are right, and when something happens, they don't go to the relevant authority to make the report or to share their issues. But of course, there are many areas that we can improve in terms of PDPA because at the moment, government also are looking certain areas. Today, the processor who are managing the data is also responsible if data is compromised. In the past, it's only industry that manage data or use the data is responsible for the security of data. But of course, technology changes, threat also changes, and our challenge is to understand the technological changes and threat changes. And we have to respond by adopting more innovative approach in order to improve our rules and regulation. But it is a good and positive thing that we are moving towards the right directions because it is dynamic things that we have to cannot be complacent. So everything is moving and we have to adapt to the changes.
Yeah, and we do have to move fast enough as well. Now, speaking of dynamic and what's happening, particularly in the internet and banking fraud arena, Munira, you've also been fantastic at using social media and your Twitter platform to sort of explain and break down what actually happens during some of these scams. Now, there is one which is quote unquote called pig butchering. Can you break down for us pretty simply what this actually means and how and why this has sort of become a bit of a buzzword when it comes to online scams?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So pig butchering is a metaphor for fattening up the pig right before the proverbial slaughter.
Right.
So, and it's an expression that originated from China, and it involves a very systematic approach to target the victims, or what we call in the business, the mark. It
Right.
entails a very elaborate process, and it is very opportunistic, involving two stages. One, the persuasive strategy, and the other is the advanced fee strategy. So it can include processes such as creating a fake identity to try and social engineer their way to their mark, and then initiating a contact with the mark, winning their trust, winning their confidence, winning their friendship, and then you try to convince them, hey, you know what, I'm about to start this business venture. I think you should put your money in. And they're gonna you should invest in us, you could trust us, we're completely legit. And that's when they got them to put in their money and convince them, make them all believe that it's completely legitimate, it's all above board, when it's completely not. And then that's when they start to squeeze them for all they're worth, and that's when the butchering really begins. And that's when they start to cut them off. And once the victim starts to feel like they're losing it all, that's the breaking point. So it's either they start to manipulate them more and squeeze them more, or just leave them high and dry and just leave them.
It's psychological warfare.
Oh, absolutely.
Literally, the way you describe it. And I go back to what Sasali had said just earlier. It's about reporting, but clearly this doesn't often happen when someone is already in the thick of a scam such as pig butchering.
Yeah.
Right, thank you so much for that, Maria. And YB, I wanted to ask you about what more should financial organizations like banks be doing to ensure customers are protected from hacks and leaks as well?
Yeah, I was just reminded that my mom gave me your number, kena, CSM, because my mom lost 75,000 ringgit from her from her Tabung Haji account.
Staggering.
Yeah, which is a huge amount.
Yes.
And, the question that I have is, they need to know who has this amount of money in their in their Tabung Haji account. So how did they know my mom had this amount, if not more? So I think that, a lot of people have this assumption that there's some kind of, there's a way that these people also know their mark, right? So it's more than just that. And but the most puzzling thing in a lot of cases is how large amount of money is transferred across multiple banks in minutes. My mom lost 75,000 ringgit in 15 minutes from Tabung Haji, to Bank Islam, to Hong Leong Bank, and then we don't know where. So I had a meeting with Bank Negara a couple of Fridays ago, and it's something which I have said publicly as well.
Sure.
Banks have to change their risk rules. They have to change the way they operate. If an account holder does not normally do these kind of transactions with these volumes to these accounts, flag it, call the person up, stop the money from going out.
Sure.
And I don't understand why banks do nothing or very little to anything. And it's extremely frustrating. I've met some banking executives, they understand. It's more than that. In fact, some of them gave me a very good proposal or idea.
Right.
That banks, in their annual reports every year, should disclose how many victims of scams is affected through their accounts. So every bank then releases a number, how many scam victims they have, with how much lost, and in that way, make it competitive among the banks, and people will know, hey, there are a lot of people who kena with this bank. I don't want to. And this was actually proposed to me by a banking executive. So I think banks can do a lot. Bank Negara can do a lot. Association of Banks in Malaysia can do a lot. IBIM can do a lot. Singapore's the Monetary Authority of Singapore, in January of 2022, already came out with a roadmap. By October, they're supposed to come up with some mechanism for a recovery fund. In Malaysia, we have heard very little. So I think the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Communications, the Minister in charge of Law, the Prime Minister need to view this matter extremely seriously. Every year, 20,000 people on average become victims, and they lose collectively 660 million ringgit. In the time that we go through this live session,
Of an hour.
About 3 people would have fallen victims, would have become victims, and they would have lost almost 100,000 ringgit. So the amounts are staggering. The way that they identify their mark is like extremely creative.
Yeah.
And yet it's almost like the authorities or these financial institutions are unfortunately, the Malay word is the one that gives the most psychological oomph. It's almost as though they're mandul, as though they're completely incapable of doing anything about it. The people who have come and met me, some people have lost 50,000 ringgit, 100,000 ringgit.
That's right. And thank you so much for breaking down how much will be lost just in this hour. But Cik Sazali, very quickly, I want to jump over and ask you, especially from CSM's perspective, are there any barriers towards our banking institutions also engaging in, microsecurity architecture? And is there any hesitation on their part?
Okay. If I am criminal, I want to steal money from the bank, I won't attack the bank directly, because I know bank, they have a very strong IT infrastructure and security system, and they can always detect my action to intrude the system. Rather, I know bank has many customers who have access to the systems, and I will attack the customers. Because when we talk about cybersecurity, we always address the triad of people, process, and technology. Technology is put last. People is first, because it is the people behind the technology. So in this case, people is the weakest link. And no matter what we do sometimes in terms of technology, but always people is the weakest link. And it is sometimes our people just download apps from the cloud. They realize these apps can be malicious, aim to steal their identity. And it is not so technical, but rather when we download the apps, we realize we also download the malware. As I mentioned, this malware will create a backdoor to our system and steal our personal information. Then they can even hijack our telephone number, and they can hijack our account
Absolutely.
and so on. They
And
can
thanks for
model-
highlighting that people quite often form the weakest part of the link. We'll be definitely going much more into that, but time for a quick break. Stay with us on Wacana English Edition. See you in a minute.
My name is Nick Emer. I'm the co-CEO of Bits Media. So Bits Media is the creator and developer of the Muslim Pro lifestyle mobile app, which is the #1 global app for the Muslim community. And as we like to say, the home of all things digital for the Muslims.
My father jumped out of UMNO, and then there was a lot of speculations involved. So, but for the beneficiary of the party, they've decided to suspend in order to remove any suspicious within the party.
Biggest challenge that we have currently is the awareness that SMEs can export to the world in a cost-effective manner, and eBay is there to provide support to them. This awareness is not there with most of the SMEs, and our endeavor is to increase this awareness, one through this report and two with various engagements that we have with governmental agencies or the other nodal agencies that expand and increase the awareness of exports. From that point of view, I think we provide a unique platform, and SMEs are taking advantage of this. Through this advantage, Singapore and Malaysia have reached 86 and 81% of SMEs exporting to the world.
Welcome back to Wacana English Edition with me, Tamina Kausji. Right, so now job scam syndicates resulting in human trafficking have actually really come under the spotlight. 16 Malaysians were rescued from Cambodia within the last week alone. Of course, 23-year-old Malaysian Goi Sen Feng, who passed away in Thailand as a result of literal torture along the Myanmar border. But at the same time, how do we begin addressing this issue? YB Fahmi, perhaps I could start with you.
Yeah, I think there are several ways. Yeah, definitely better cross-jurisdictional cooperation. I think the Minister of Communications mentioned recently about greater cooperation within ASEAN. I think the Minister of Home Affairs probably would play a very big role, and also looking at that kind of security architecture, and also Interpol, I think, plays a big role. The thing which is quite puzzling for me is, you know, I wonder whether not only job scams, but also scam call centers, when they call people like my mom, they are very conversant in I wonder where they are. I wonder where their ports, their call centers are in Malaysia, or whether these, you know, they're actually overseas, right? And there's a part of me that wants to kind of try and connect a dot. Could people be lured overseas to these other jurisdictions and be making calls from there to Malaysia? I mean, this is speculative, but if, you know, I kind of see that there is this network of exploits, whether it's in the way they identify their mark, the way they get our data, the way they operate. And to me, this speaks about the entire security infrastructure and architecture and how it needs to be plugged very quickly. As we've been talking, things evolve very quickly. Scams have been around for a very long time, obviously.
Sure.
It's just that now they've gone online, right? And scams this year and next year will be completely different, which is why, to me, fundamentally, it's about amending and updating the laws. That, to me, is extremely important. That's a start.
And Munira, your thoughts on the same?
So this is a multi-layered question, and that requires a policy reckoning, if you may allow me to say so, in order to arrive at an appropriate solution. We need to ask ourselves very uncomfortable questions about why is it that people as young as 14-year-old high school dropout fell victim to these scams, to the syndicates, in fact. And a large part of this problem is that it's due to the fact that there is a very clear failure of our own social security net And we have to acknowledge that a significant population of a significant segment of our population is economically vulnerable. And this is the very vulnerability that these scammers are looking to exploit.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that you mentioned the age of one of the victims, it immediately brings me to the fact that we've also been spending so much of our time, particularly teenagers and young people, online due to the pandemic, as well as, in general, social media and online media consumption habits, particularly among the youth. Sheikh Sazali, your thoughts on the same. What can we plug, particularly when it comes to these job scam syndicates?
Okay. We are becoming more interconnected in this environment. In the era of digital, the line dividing cyber and physical is not clear. And in fact, as we are connected to people, processors, agencies, our partners, our digital ecosystem is changing. In fact, it leads to the creation of new business supply chains. And this is the combination of traditional crime that have been facilitated through internet. It is not cyber so much. It is combination of cyber and traditional crime. So the expert who should deal with this issue must come from technical and various areas within the ecosystem. And because traditional crime in the past, it is confined within physical boundaries, not cyber crime. But today, their activity has gone cross-border. So there are many cross-border evidential, jurisdictional, and legal issues. And no entity can work alone in this area. It is a combination of entities who are from legal, technical, political, educational, should sit down and discuss the best way how to address the issue. Because criminals, they are becoming more sophisticated. And the less technical-minded criminal, they are working together with hackers who are very technical, and they are working together. And in fact, today, cybercrime is service. That means traditional criminals who are less technical-minded, they don't have to perform the job. For example, it is hackers that steal the data or personal information, and they are selling this personal data to the traditional criminal groups. And this traditional criminal group will make use of this data for criminal activities. So it is, we are talking about one business structure or one business model. They are collaborating, yet we are in physical world, we are still working in isolations. So we together it must be equally evolutionary and dynamic in order to adapt to the changes. Otherwise, very difficult for us to deal with the challenges in the future.
Sure. Yes, very fairly observed, Jason Ali.
Yeah,
YB?
just a quick one. I mean, I think it's very, very right what you've said. The question in everyone's mind, when we ask in Parliament, how many people have been arrested or brought to court, the minister or deputy minister will churn out numbers like 14,000, 16,000 people have been brought to court. But we don't know how many of the kepala, of the mastermind, of the big sharks, the people who are really coordinating. Yeah, you catch the mules, but the mules are also, in a way, victims themselves. You know, they were lied to surrender their accounts. Yes, it's a mistake, it's something wrong. But there is never, I think so far, I don't see the will to bring these criminals to court, right? And they're still out there. And this, to me, is the most puzzling piece of this entire picture.
Sure.
Why are they still free?
Yeah, why are they still free? And from there, very quickly, back to Sheikh Sazali. Now, how equipped do you feel is Malaysia's Commercial Crime Investigation Department to be handling these transnational syndicates that keep popping up while also dealing with domestic scam syndicates?
Okay. Okay, dealing with cybercrime is challenging because data is virtual, in which evidence can be deleted, can be adjusted, and we require an expert that are capable to extract the evidence. And what more when the evidence is cross-border, and it involves cross-border legal and jurisdictional issues. And how we do our job also are different. And of course, we cannot just simply go to other countries and do whatever we want, because our laws only confined within our national geographical boundaries. We cannot impose our laws on other countries. And I just want to quote one incident. My own friend, his email was intercepted, and where he received fake email asking him to pay for 945,000 as down payment before the supplier can actually deliver the goods. Believing that email is real, he transferred the money. After some time, he realized the email was fake and he was cheated. And he called me, "Dali, can I get back the money?" So I told him, "You are still here now. The moment you transfer the money, the criminal who receives the money, he can rewire the money to somewhere else, or he can withdraw all the money and move somewhere else. But you are still here." And I was informed the criminal was in German. And my friend could simply ask the police to go to German and investigate. So there are many cross-border legal issues in this matter, and our capability, technical capability, also are different. So not only when we have to share, especially in ASEAN, for example, our technical capabilities are not at the same level. So we cannot investigate if our counterpart don't have the technical capability to extract the evidence and do investigation. So it is our task not only to make sure that our counterpart have the same level, but awareness also very important. Because cyber law, for example, if the country is not strong in cyber law, that country can be used as springboard by the criminal to attack another country.
Sure.
Because he is confident he won't be caught because of the law is there, is weak.
Yeah, and thank you for explaining that. I think it makes a lot more sense now that we've had it laid out in such a way. And going from the complexity of transnational scams, Munira, something which is a lot more basic that people are often confronted with. One of the latest scammer tools, which is, of course, fake apps that mask themselves as the real thing. Why can such apps actually exist in app stores? And is there anything actually being done to prevent this from happening?
All right, so you're thinking of APK files, and APK stands for Android Package Kit, and this is the file format that Android uses to distribute and install apps. So to understand why APKs are a thing, you'd have to understand the nature and spirit of Google, and this is because Android is developed by Google, and Google leads and supports open source initiatives. Google releases the source code for Android users under an open source license. And the fact that it is open has fostered a large community of developers and enthusiasts to use the open source data as, as a foundation for community-driven projects, and allows promising coders to explore the talents and nurture the talent and develop new applications. So of course, there are people who are going to abuse this opportunity, and they are going to create malwares. So I don't really recommend outright banning, because that's not a very good solution to the problem. You're just going to end up disrupting the technical solution that leads to black holing. And we're just going to stifle creativity and talent, and that's the last thing we want to do. So instead, it's more practical to develop a more holistic and comprehensive practical ideas, practical approach. And that is by starting from number one, we just have to exercise caution. We just have to remind people to exercise caution and scrutiny of what they're actually allowing into their devices. And they need to think who or what they're allowing into the spaces, into the computers, into the screens. And there's always the underutilized report option, and people are not using that enough. And you could use that to alert companies that there's a malware and they need to remove that. But apart from that, I don't really recommend technical solutions. But this is, again, I come from policy perspective, and policy approach is always the most practical solution.
Sure. Thanks so much for that. I think that was very informative, particularly for those who have been tempted, but now they're going to think twice before they do it. Okay. Now, who ought to be responsible when a bank customer loses their money due to hackings or system breach? Not just everyday Malaysians. We've also had high-profile individuals like there was, of course, Dr. Rafida Abdullah, who recently shared that her savings, once again, just like Fahmi said, what happened to your mom, they were transferred without knowledge and approvals. So who should be responsible, really, when it comes down to ensuring the victims get their due? YB?
Yeah, I like to use the analogy of a highway. Banks, for financial transaction online, have created these highways so that we can move money from point A to point B. And every year, on this financial highway that banks have built with regulations set by Bank Negara, 20,000 people fall off a cliff. And every year, 660 million ringgit is lost from falling off this cliff. So I think there's some amount of mistake, of course, could be due to users themselves. Yeah, you accidentally give to somebody else, believing that this person is who they claim to be, but you shouldn't be giving your all of your information to them. At the same time, there are certain things that banks should be able to do. So what I'm saying is, this highway with this cliff, banks have some responsibility to make sure that whatever exploits are being taken advantage of are plugged. So we build a wall so that people don't fall off that cliff. At the same time, as drivers, as users of this financial highway, we have our own responsibility not to give information or data to people that we don't trust. In other words, we have to update the way we trust each other. Are you really who you say you are? Every time I get a call now, I'm like, are you really who you say you are? Right? Check, double check, triple check. But banks need to do something as well. So when I look at how Singapore, through the Monetary Authority of Singapore, is looking through from a policy perspective on what they call an equitable sharing of this recovery fund. So on the user side, on bank customer side, there's some responsibility, of course, but on the bank side, there's some responsibility. I'll give a very clear example.
Sure.
If you put money into a fixed deposit account, and the terms and conditions of that account expressly says you cannot withdraw except by going physically to a bank and producing your MyCard.
Right.
And yet you lose money through online banking from your FD. Whose mistake was that? So this is a question that I posed to Bank Negara, and I don't know what is their answer, but it's when you look at questions like this, then we get to see, yes, there's some mistake here, there's some mistake there, and to me, we need to have some kind of recovery fund. We need to amend the laws around PIDM to enable the scope to be widened to include victims of scams. We need to amend the Financial Services Act so that the Ombudsman for Financial Services will also look at the quantum from 25,000 ringgit maximum for online transaction scams to be increased to, in my mind, 50, 75, 100,000. In that way, we'll cover a lot more people. We also need to provide, maybe in the budget, we will be able to discuss this. We need to provide more funds and resources so that Bank Negara and all of the agencies can put together a one-stop anti-scam center based in my mind, Bank Negara, so that all of these concerns, whether it's about policy, whether it's about actual cases, can be dealt with holistically on the spot in one place.
Right. Some absolutely great recommendations over there, Munira.
To his points, which are great. So another aspect of this is that it's a question of legality. There's no easy answer, mainly because we need to examine what kind of legal mechanisms are in place to protect consumers. And unfortunately, it looks like consumers are getting the raw end of the bargain. And we can see that even from online shopping, when something goes wrong, it's very difficult for us to seek this, to dispute what's the transaction and to seek reparations. And a lot of this has to do with people don't know that tribunal exists, and they can seek reparations through the tribunal, but people are not aware of these rights. And this is where one aspect that policymakers should address is that enhance our knowledge, our awareness about what kind of aspects that we could resort to address any disputes. And another thing is that this can also further be improved if Malaysia would consider revising existing data and privacy laws, and advocate for national privacy standards, and promote responsible corporate behavior where people could have more control over data and be more punitive towards entities that hold data custody. And we can even draw upon from the EU's GDPR laws, for instance, where they are more punitive towards companies rather than users. And this is one aspect that's quite practical. It's more sympathetic towards the public. There's all because for one thing, we should also acknowledge the fact that the GDPR took 12 years to be enacted. That's a lot of considerations being put in place. And another thing is that we could also look at other countries for lessons to be learned. Even Indonesia right now, they just enacted their own data privacy laws. We could also review that and see what they're doing different and what could be improved on.
Definitely. And also, of course, it's been just 12 years since PDPA was enacted, so about time for that. Right, so we go off into a quick break, but we'll be back for the last segment of this episode of Wacana English Edition. Don't go anywhere.
Muslim Pro has actually never sold or shared any data with the US military, and we will never will. So the Vice incident was actually an allegation on a third party that we had a very brief relationship with. So when the allegation came out, we were just as surprised as our users. And I think what's important to know is that we took immediate steps. It was a very important learning lesson for us. But we were also glad that we were able to move beyond it and also, regain the support from many of these users.
We've yet to formalize our manifesto for UMNO Kelantan. It's up to the Badan Perhubungan, Datuk Sri Ahmad Jazlan. So we can't reveal yet our manifesto. I'm sure we have our manifesto ready once the general election is being called for.
My name is Vidmay Naini. I lead eBay's business in India and Southeast Asia. My primary role is to enable SMEs to export to the world. eBay enables SMEs across the world, specifically in India and Southeast Asia, to sell to the world. What we enable is we enable market access to 190 countries and beyond, and to 142 million buyers across the world.
Welcome back to Wacana English Edition with me, Tamina Kausji. Now, rounding out the discussion, Munira, I would actually like to go a little bit more macro. Now, what are the implications of cybersecurity threats on matters related to national defense? Let's take the example of the recent hijacking of Prime Minister's Telegram group, for example. What does that mean in cybersecurity?
It suggests that our cyber policy, cyber protection is quite weak, and this is a concern in terms of national security, defense. I would disagree with any notions that it's not a defense issue, that it's not a national security issue. It is actually, in fact, a national security issue because you are giving the vibe, if I may use that expression, that anyone can just commit intrusion into a system, and it's a very poor signal to give to our to our opponents. For instance, it just gives the impression that our walls of safety is so poor that it's so fragmented. It can easily be fragmented. So I think I would from my own experience, I see it as a kind of indicator that something's not right at the policy level, at strategic level, because the whole point is that we want to avoid any strategic surprises. So we have to have a better resilience strategy in place. Now that the fact that we are having money being drained out in such a way through cyber scams and everything, something must be done. And that would require a lot of comprehensive approach, not just by reminding people that they have to be on the alert and everything, but it has to be more comprehensive. It has to instill a better culture of operational security. People need to learn how they can do better. And you can't expect them to just know it from vacuum. It has to be, you have to unload those information and make it accessible, in fact. The other approach I would suggest is that I think part of the problem is that it's because a large segment of the population do not understand their rights as citizens, then they don't know what protection is available to them. So when they get approached targeted by scammers, it's very easy for them to be fooled into thinking that they are talking to someone in a position of authority, when in fact it's a scammer. We've heard this story so many times.
Sure.
They get approached by someone who claim to be a police from LHDN and everything. And that's the thing that they're doing because they know that we don't know government processes. And that's a strong vulnerability that should be addressed from top down.
Sure. Thanks so much for that, Munira. And from there, Sazali, let's now summarize Malaysia's legislative framework for protection of personal information. We have, of course, Munira had brought up Indonesia and the general European laws. Is Malaysia's data protection law based on any international instruments or laws or other jurisdictions?
Yeah, of course, the key in cybersecurity is collaborations. It is because today we are living in a global environment, and no, to ensure cyberspace is to ensure the global cybersecurity. So the key is collaboration. So among the areas that we can work is on the issue of legal aspect. But there are certain issues that we have to consider before we can talk about common protection law in a global environment. As I mentioned just now, we have our own national security interest, and our law is to protect our national security interests. But at the same time, we also share some common issues at the global environment in which we have to work together with other countries in order to address the same issues. But along the way, there are some areas that we have to consider. If we adopt the global protection law, for example, we have some obligations. And that obligation is big obligations. The question is, are we ready to perform that obligations? Because when we become part of the global community in the protection of this law, whenever request or demand from our counterpart, we have to respond. And we don't want to overwhelm by this response, and we broke down because we also have some local issues that we have to address. And these are the things that we have to consider. If we want, yes, this is the direction in order to address global issues. But at the same time, are we ready? Because when we adopt, we have big, heavy obligation to fulfill our responsibility. So in terms of human capability and capacity, and over in terms of technical resources, whether we have sufficient technical or technology to serve the purpose. Because we don't want our obligation to be backfire us in the later. Because if we have the obligation, make sure we can perform that obligation as and when expected by our counterparts.
Sure. And now moving more into a framework area question, YB, do you feel that relevant authorities that oversee our data protection laws, do they actually have sufficient investigative powers? I mean, I really hope that one of the takeaways from this discussion will be people don't forget. You've kept repeating it, 20,000 Malaysians, 660 million ringgit.
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases that I've encountered, I think there needs to be better coordination among the respective agencies. I think there seems to be some synaptic gap in the investigation, a gap between PDRM and the banks. Banks say police need to come over and get the data, then the police say, like in my mom's case, can you go? So imagine the police ask my mom, a 75-year-old ex-civil servant, go to the bank and get your bank statement. Hi, doesn't make sense, right? So it's about understanding where there are gaps in the process to make it faster, easier, smoother for a lot of people, especially investigators. We know the police get a lot of cases, yeah, and they have to investigate a lot. So in that sense, it has to be made simpler. That's why I'm an advocate of three things. One, there needs to be an RCI. In this year alone, we've had 4 security incidences amounting to an estimated 25 million sets of personal data stolen. That's like one every 2-3 months, yeah, one major cybersecurity incident. So we need an RCI. Second, we need to do a cybersecurity audit of all of our government agencies. Yeah, at least do that, start off with that, and assess whose data is being protected, who is doing it well, who's not doing it well, and fix it now. Get some white hats, go and test all of the and identify all of the vulnerabilities and get it fixed now. The third one is, as I said earlier, we need to have a one-stop center.
Yeah.
Bring all of the agencies together, get all of the heads, and a critical component is having a dialogue at an ASEAN level. If we can do that to build an ASEAN economic community, we've got to build that for an ASEAN cybersecurity community. I think that will be critical going forward. So our Minister of Foreign Affairs is very proactive when it comes to ASEAN. It's something which, if I see him, when I see him next, I will propose this to him. So those 3-4 things will
Absolutely.
be critical.
And I think it's very interesting that he brought up ASEAN level dialogues, because at the same time, the reason why we are so much targeted, not just in Malaysia, but in the region for scams is the high volume of financial transactions that we do online, right? Okay, so from there, moving into Cik Sazali, I would like to ask you about, are there legal obligations on the Data Protection Authority to cooperate with other data protection authorities, or is there a mechanism to resolve this for us right now?
So, the global, okay, our relation with others country is more on bilateral engagement and understanding. And of course, as I mentioned just now, our laws is to protect our national security interests, and our relationship and our collaboration and cooperation is more on soft approach, not much on legal. As I mentioned, if we are obligated under legal means, we have big obligation to fulfill that responsibility. And the question is always, are we ready to perform that obligations? And our approach toward this issue is more on bilateral engagement or understanding, and more on mutual understanding to address common issues. And the key is, as I mentioned, collaboration. We have to sit down, discuss, identify our common issues, and we have to work together towards coming up with solutions that can serve our mutual interests. So that is my...
Thank you for that, Jasad Ali. Now, Munira, I'd like to ask you about what security obligations are imposed on personal information owners, individuals like ourselves, and service providers that process this PI on their behalf.
My understanding is that we as the users are responsible for data, and any companies that withhold data are also responsible for the protection of and security of that data. So the missing element here, which is my biggest criticism, is that from my understanding, reading through the our PDPA 2010, is that apparently when there's a data breach, companies are not obligated to declare that breach. It's voluntary, and I think this is something that needs to be changed.
Exactly like what YB had pointed out earlier, right? And that would perhaps prove critical, because there's also new surveys that are showing from FICO that actually 1/3 of Malaysians are, they will go through with a fine-tooth comb before they choose a new financial institution for online banking, specifically due to all the data breaches that have been happening, right? So from there, Cik Sazali, you've also previously mentioned that there's no such thing as 100% security, but at the same time, we've got to start off somewhere. So from a community and society awareness angle, what more can be done while we're still waiting, in a sense, for policy and wider frameworks to catch up?
Okay. The concept is that we have to address cybersecurity at all levels, because wherever things at low level, targeting people, it has some connection or related to maybe some issues at higher level, maybe involve our government. So we have to look the ecosystem, and because in today's interconnected world, without we realize, we also create new business supply chain. And every point within the supply chain is important, because security is a change. So we have to manage the weakest link. So any link broken, the whole chain broken. This is the world that we are living now. We are interconnected to each other. We are no more working in isolations. So when we address cybersecurity, we have to address the issue of technology, people, and process. So Why technology? Because we have to keep abreast with the trend, and as we know, criminals are sophisticated, and we need up-to-date and innovative technology to address criminal. And of course, behind technology is people. We need people who are creative, educated, well-trained to address the issues. And as threats are evolving, so do our experts. They cannot be complacent. But between people and technology are our policy, laws, all these things we have to look into. Because as threat changes, our law also has to be dynamic enough to address the changes. So there is no one way, straightforward solution in addressing the issue. Of course, people say the weakest link is always people. You can have the best technology, but if the people still download apps from the internet, still have no purpose, because it's not about technical issues, it's about people issues. Because by downloading the apps, without we realize, we also might download malware that can steal information. And we are the one who bring that malware into our computers. So they are inside. So by having that malware inside the computer, they can steal our personal data. Nothing much we can do. Because they can steal our identity. So we can have the best protection. But if the malware steal our identity and use that stolen identity to enter the system, not much the system can do. But of course, we can reboot the procedure. For example, in terms of scam or internet banking fraud, we can improve the procedure, for example, because it is not logical if people do transaction 50,000 at one time. So these are the things that we have to look into, because for me, for example, I only limit 5,000 or 10,000 for one transaction. So if I withdraw or do transaction more than that, the system will trigger, and or the bank will always call me to verify whether it is me that do the transaction. So these are the things that you can look into procedures.
Sure.
And technology, as I mentioned, our Bank Negara, they always ensure the proper measures in place, strong IT infrastructure, and strong security system in place. In fact, we have international standard in place for all the financial institutions to adhere to.
So often coming back once again to the human element. Right. So now to round up what has been a most informative discussion, can I just ask for each one of your parting thoughts and message to all the audiences out there on how best to continue to stay safe online rather than falling victim to all these predatory scams? YB Fahmi?
Kalau tak kenal, jangan klik. That's one, right? And double check, triple check. I think I've listed out a list of things that government, international community can do. Banks have to play a role. We have to play our part. We have to understand that this is a national security issue. It is a crisis, cybersecurity crisis that we're seeing right now. And there has to be political willpower to actually do something now instead of leaving it for tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Munira, your parting thoughts?
My parting thoughts is that I would love to see more demystifying of scams. It's important for people to understand that scams are not the ones that's evolving, actually. It's actually the approach, methods, and strategies. Scam, by its very nature, is perpetual because it works. And it's all about cost-benefit analysis. So because of this, it's important to remember that scammers are just rational actors. And scams happen because they create the illusion that they are a service that meets an economic need by pretending to supply that demand. So again, this is all about the facilitation of the internet that involves tactics, technicalities, and situational awareness. So what we should do as another approach that's not placing too much burden on the population is that we could try and make more information, more pertinent information, that's a keyword, pertinent information, more available to the public, so they would know what to look for if they get any whiff of someone approaching them, trying to steal the money, then they have a venue to seek out the question and answer that question. What is happening here? How can I counter this?
Absolutely. Contextualize the threat, right? And Jason Zali, if we could end with you and your
Okay.
final thoughts.
Cybersecurity is not merely technical issues. In the past, yes, when it comes to cybersecurity issues, they pass to technical person, but today it's more than technical issues. It can be about security and compliance, strategies, training, education, and so on. And we have to see the ecosystem in the whole perspective. Whatever happens at the low level, at the people's level, may have impact at the higher level, targeting organization and even government. And in most cases, even in most advanced attack, it often starts with simple attacks at the low level, targeting the people through phishing. It is where the criminal can come into the system. We are the one who bring in. From there, they can create backdoor, enter our network to explore, and still higher privilege. And when they are inside, they can steal whatever information they want. They can do damage. So who allow them? We are the one. We are the one, the people, the employees. So my advice: always alert, curious. Don't simply download whatever attachment, apps that we are not sure the origin and its authenticity. So it is about awareness again. So people have to be educated, re-educated, and we have to be aggressive in providing awareness to the users.
Sure. Thanks so much for that. And thank you all for taking the time to join us, as well as to share with our audiences out there. And I think we will end there. And let's all do our part in staying aware of the vast variety of cyber fraud and threats that do surround us on a daily basis. I'm Tamina Kauji, signing off for now on Wacana English Edition. We'll see you again for the next episode. Take care and stay safe.